Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Yeah, mine is going to be a blackboard talk. I'm going to try and communicate the excitement of quantum computing just from the blackboard. I do have a couple of pictures to show you at the end. Maybe if we have time, we'll do that. But that's not necessary. These are pictures you can see on Google anyway, okay? Right, so what we are supposed to be discussing today, so I think the title I had given is computing with quantum bits. Okay. So you're all class 11 going to class 12, is that right? Okay. So I guess many of you might be doing computer science as a subject. So even if you're not, I suppose everyone is familiar with the idea of bits, right? Now throughout this couple of lectures, I will refer to bits as classical bits, okay? Because in my world, bits will be quantum, okay? And I hope to communicate to you what quantum bits are, how they are different from classical bits, and why should we be interested in them, and why is the world excited about the idea of computing with quantum bits. So before that, maybe how many of you have heard of quantum computing? Okay, maybe that's 2/3. Okay, good. Maybe one from each table can tell me what you have heard about quantum computing. Yeah?
So in classical computing, you have a bit which is either a 1 or a 0, whereas in quantum computing, a bit exists as a superposition of 1 and 0, also known as a qubit, and you use probability to solve problems.
Wow, okay. So he's done half my lecture for me there. Anyone else? Okay, so let me ask this. So he said something about what are quantum bits. He used, okay, so let me write down a few things he used, few words he used. Okay, he said something about superposition, and then he said something about probability. Yeah, okay. What are quantum computers useful for? Like, why should one be interested in them? Okay, go ahead.
So quantum computers can be used to solve problems which require classical computers a lot of steps, because quantum computers can solve things in parallel.
Okay, nice. Wow. So where is all this general knowledge from? I'm just curious. Yeah, the internet, the classical internet, and the YouTube. Okay. All right. So that's another word. Computing in parallel. Okay. Whatever that means. Yeah. What else can I ask you? Okay, are quantum computers being built today? Yes. Yes. Are we already at a stage where we can solve problems on quantum computers?
Yes. We can solve, but very limited.
Okay, I'm tempted to ask, why are we limited?
So the current quantum computers we have, one is we have only a limited number of qubits. So I think the maximum number of qubits which Google has, for example, is around 70.
Okay.
So we have a limited amount of qubits. There's a lot of noise in the qubits.
Okay.
And we are not able to fully control the qubits yet. So there's a lot of like after a specific amount of time, the qubit loses its state, or there are factors like that which we have to take into consideration while doing the experiment.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I think I have enough keywords to start the lecture now. Okay. So it's good. So I think at least some of you seem to know a fair bit about the idea of qubits and quantum computing. But I guess most of you may have seen this idea in the news. So for example, he said Google, right? So there are companies today like Google, Yeah, IBM. So IBM has a platform called IBM Q, which is something all of you can use Google to go and log into, okay? And then there are several other companies. I will not name them here, but I just want to tell you that the state of the art today is not limited by 70 qubits. IBM is already has released and will soon release access to people also, a processor with 400 qubits, okay? So this is where we are at today, and a lot of us believe that this, now the current state of the art is not at a stage where I can actually show you a quantum computer in practice, right? I cannot give, but we are already at a stage where, for example, if you Google IBM Q, okay, you can log in, you can set up an account. I guess you all have Gmail accounts already. Yeah. Yeah, Gmail wasn't born until I was doing my master's in IIT. So that's where we were born. So you can make an account, okay? And you can actually get access through the cloud. You all know what the cloud is? Through the cloud to some of the quantum processors that IBM has. Okay, so we are definitely at a stage where this is becoming a reality, but it is not a reality that where immediately each of you has a quantum device like this or a quantum laptop, or even we are not even at a stage where, you know, like with supercomputing, there were supercomputing facilities that were built, right? And a few people, researchers, etc., had access to these supercomputing facilities and so on. So we are not even there yet. But we believe that this will be a reality very soon, and that's why everyone is excited about this idea of, this new idea of computing, right? Okay, so obviously quantum plays a very central role in this, right? And I know all of you have done class 11 physics, but I am not sure how much of quantum mechanics you have been introduced to, right? But some of the keywords which we will need are already here, such as superposition and probability. But during this first lecture, what I'm going to actually do is to go a little bit into the mathematics of quantum bits, okay? Because without understanding a little bit about the mathematics of quantum bits, it's very hard to get a feel for why is this an exciting development, why is this going to do better than classical computing and so on, okay? So the classical bit, as you all know, is just something that takes one of two values, 0, 1. Formally, I will call this a binary variable, right? Some x, which takes one of two values, 0 or 1. This is also called a binary field mathematically, right? And classical computing proceeds via functions that map, so let me say functions that map zeros and ones and maybe strings of zeros and ones. So when I put the cross n, it just means that I have a string of n bits, right? I have something like 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, etc. How many ever? N of them, right? This is what I'll call a string, right? This will be a string of n bits to maybe a single bit if your outcome is, if your answer that you expect is a single bit answer, or maybe some other m bit string, right? So this will be a string of m bits. Do you know what such functions are called? Which map binaries, logical gates, yes, but mathematically what are these kind of functions called? You've heard of bool? These are Boolean functions. Okay? And the way you implement or realize Boolean functions on your devices, whether it's your computer, your laptop, your phone, your anything today, the way you implement this is via what you said, logical gates, right? Now, each logic gate is itself a simple Boolean function, but typically your logic gates are single bit functions or at best 2-bit functions, right? Like an AND gate takes 2 bits to 1 bit. A NAND gate takes 2 bits to 1 bit. A NOT gate, single bit. So these are single bit or 2-bit functions, but that cannot obviously solve complicated problems, the kind of problems that we are solving today, the kind of stuff that ChatGPT is doing today. That's not single gates, right? So that's putting together a sequence of such logical operations and realizing complicated functions like this, Boolean functions, right? And the power of classical computing, or the power of this set of basic Boolean operations, is an idea called universality. You've heard of universal gates? No? Some of you? So, yeah. So we say that some set of gates is universal, okay, if any Boolean function can be realized or implemented using some sequence of elementary Boolean operations. So that sequence of elementary, or that set of elementary Boolean operations, is what you call a universal gate set. And for our classical computing today, I heard some people tell me some names of universal gates. So you've heard of the NAND gate, NOR. So a single gate like the NAND gate is universal, which means I can represent any Boolean function purely in terms of some sequence of NAND gates, okay? And that's very powerful, because it means that if I were to think about building a computer, then the elementary operation that I have to realize is one of these. And once I've realized one of these elementary operations, I'm done. Because the mathematics tells me that any function that I want to implement on binary strings can be implemented using this basic operation, which I have in my lab, okay? So that's sort of the classical approach or paradigm to computing, right? Now, how do these things change once quantum mechanics comes into the picture? So a quantum bit is not a simple binary valued variable, okay, but is actually a vector in a 2-dimensional vector space, okay. And over the next half an hour, my aim is to help you understand what this means, because this will govern everything else that follows, okay. So I'm going to denote, so corresponding to the classical bit 0 and the classical bit 1, I can write down a quantum bit value 0. So this is my quantum bit 0, and this is quantum bit value 1. And you notice that instead of just writing 0 and 1, I have now written it in a funny way with this notation, okay, with a straight line and a right angle bracket. So this notation, so these are called kets or ket vectors, and this notation goes back to a gentleman by name Dirac. Everyone here has heard of him? Okay. Some of you have heard of him. So this is also sometimes called Dirac notation. Dirac was one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and so on, right? So this notation is what you will find most of us quantum mechanists using, and this has become today the language of quantum computing, right? So instead of writing x, I will write some, I'll just call my variable psi, okay? So this is the Greek letter psi. So this is often read as ket psi, okay? And this can take one of two values. Let's say for now it can take one of two values. So I will write like this in the same way, but what this curly bracket means, we'll see, okay? So I can write down a quantum bit 0 and a quantum bit 1 like the classical bit, but it's no longer just a binary number. So what is it? What do I mean by vector in a two-dimensional vector space? Now all of you have done some vector stuff in your maths course, right? So, so you all know 3D real vectors. What do I mean by 3D real vectors? I mean your standard 3 coordinates. Yes, you have an x, y, and z, and you have some arbitrary point here, which you will denote by some vector v. So if I asked you what is a vector, what will you tell me? It's a collection of numbers. Yeah, that's the canonical answer that I was expecting. So how many of you have heard this? It has magnitude and direction. So, you know, I had a teacher who would ask this question, and then when this answer would come, he would say, I have an apple in my hand, okay, and I throw it up. It has magnitude and it has direction, okay. So is it a vector? So this definition that we learn in high school of a vector as something which has magnitude and direction is a somewhat limited definition, right? It serves our purposes to do the kind of mechanics problems we want to do in physics, right? Where you want to study velocity, relative velocity, acceleration, etc. It serves our purpose to do this kind of 3D geometry that we want to do in math. But the idea of a vector is something much beyond that, right? And that goes to what corresponds to, in fact, what he said, which is that it actually can be visualized as a collection of numbers, or to be more precise, as an array of numbers, okay? So that's what I'm going to tell you first. How do I translate this 3D vector language, which you all know with arrows and so on, into this language of arrays? And when I say arrays, naturally what comes into play is matrices. So I'm not sure if class 11 you all do any matrix manipulations. Some of you have started, but not everybody. So we'll do a little bit of that, right? And my aim is not to show you things in all generality, but just enough to understand a qubit, okay? So let's translate this into the matrix language now. That's my aim, to show you that the idea of a vector is something more general than just a ray which has some length and direction, okay? So now this V, as you know, you can express in terms of its components, correct? Now this is in 3D space, so any point in this room, for example, I pick some origin, I draw a line to this point, and then I decompose it along 3 components, 3 orthogonal directions, correct? So I will write this as some Vx times a unit vector along x. You're used to the cap? I cap, good, okay. Plus Vy j cap plus Vz k cap. Yes, and yeah, I'm sure some of you are thinking, why is she going back to boring school stuff? Okay, so I, j, k are unit vectors, right? Along, so I will just write this as perpendicular directions, okay? Now, instead of writing it like this, I'm going to write it like this, okay? I'm going to put, instead of putting the arrow on top, I'm going to put this inside a ket, okay? And instead of writing it as Vx I cap, Vy j cap, Vz k cap, I'm going to write this as a array of 3 numbers, Vx, Vy, Vz. So you agree that this captures the same information? If I give you these 3 values, you can point out the vector to me, right? But it has abstracted it out because it has taken out this notion of I cap, j cap and k cap, right? Now I don't have to, this object does not necessarily have to be a vector in a 3D real space like this. Was a question? Yeah.
Ma'am, is it like necessary to put it in like vertical columns, can we put it in a row as well?
Good. Yeah, you can indeed put it in a row as well. And I will show you that rows will also come into play. We will need to use both rows and columns. But now your starting point could be a row or a column, but I like columns, so I'm going to start with columns. But we can move to, we'll soon encounter rows as well. So this idea, so I will call this a column vector, okay? But if you've done a little bit of matrix theory, then you will know that this is a kind of matrix, okay? So what's a matrix? A matrix is some array of numbers which is arranged in some rows and columns, right? So now this is what I would call a 3 cross 3 matrix, right? This has 3 rows and 3 columns. So what is the dimensionality of this matrix? Very good. So this is a 3 by 1 matrix, okay? So now I have abstracted out this idea, okay? But now what is the property that I'm interested in which makes it a vector space, okay? So that's what I'm going to tell you next. So keep this here. So what is a vector space? So a vector space is basically a collection of such objects, right, which satisfy certain properties, okay? It's a collection of these kind of vector objects, where for me vector no longer means magnitude and direction, no longer means array with some length, but it could mean something like this, for example, okay? It's a collection of such. So you all done a little bit of set theory also, no? I remember class 11 starts with set theory. So you have a collection, you can think of it as a set of such vectors, okay? With certain specific properties though. What properties? So let me call this set something, okay? So I'll say that this is vector space V, okay? Just a fancy V. So it satisfies these properties. What are these properties? So these are things that you know already. Closure. What does closure usually mean? Very nice. Okay, so if I do an operation on this set, on 2 members of this set, I should get back another element of the set. So what is this operation? So this is going to be addition, okay? So closure and addition, which means that if I have a ket V and a ket W, both of which belong to this set V, then V plus W also belongs to V, okay? Now I'm going to add something to this. Suppose, so in your 3D space, maybe I should have kept that, okay. So in your 3D real vector space, you have a notion of the length of the vector, right? So we'll come to that, we'll come to how to talk about the length of this vector. But you have a notion of multiplying the vector with a number, right? So if I multiply with a vector greater than, number greater than 1, what happens? Scales. I increase the length of the vector and then I decrease the length of the vector. So this operation should also be possible here. So you realize that addition is just like vector addition, right? So in standard 3D notation, if I take 2 vectors V and W, I'll get some other vector U, right? But I can also do this. I can take some number lambda, okay? Lambda is just some number. So I can increase the length of my vector like this or decrease depending on where the lambda is. So I can scale it up, scale it down. So this operation should also be allowed. So the second operation is, so we call numbers as scalars now to contrast them with vectors, okay? So scalar multiplication, which means that if I take some lambda and multiply it with V, that also should be an element of the set, okay? Yeah. My mic, yeah.
We generally in our vector geometry even call dot product of vectors as scalar.
Coming, yeah.
So the terminology has been changed so that we call multiplying.
Oh,
with the
scalar multiplication. Very good. Yeah, I'm glad you made that connection. So you say, I see your question. So dot product is also called scalar product. You know why? Because it gives you a scalar when you do the multiplication. So the same operation is coming in our vector space as well. Okay, good. So the dot product or scalar product is basically because you take the dot and you get a number which is here called scalar. So this is where the terminology is coming from. Okay. Now that I can do scalar multiplication, I would like closure not just under addition but under something like this. Okay. So the first two properties naturally give you the third property, right? So alpha and beta are scalars. V and W are two vectors in this vector space. Okay, and when I do this, this should also give me an element of the vector space. Now, what I've stated here, which is something so obvious in this kind of 3D vector geometry, this is what encapsulates the principle of superposition in quantum mechanics. Okay. Why does this encapsulate the principle of superposition in quantum mechanics? Because in quantum theory, states are denoted as vectors in vector spaces. Okay. So quantum states, I'll give you some examples soon, are vectors in such vector spaces. What the dimension of the vector spaces will depend on what quantum system you're studying. Okay. What do I mean by dimension? Now here, the vectors were all represented as column vectors or a 3 cross 1 matrix, right? But I can think of an even simpler vector space which is just a 2 cross 1, right? I can think of longer things with d cross 1. So dimensionality is something which the physics will decide for me. This is the math. The math allows me to construct these objects. But the physics will tell me what should be the dimension of the vector space in which I write down my states. Okay? In other words, what is the dimensionality of the system? For example, if it's a qubit, then the dimensionality of my system is just 2. Okay? Because qubits are essentially 2-level quantum systems. Okay? And this idea that you can take this kind of a sum with scalar multiplication, right? And this is also a valid element of the set is what encapsulates the idea of superposition. And I think I've written that. So let me, yeah, so at least we've ticked off one keyword from this. So remember I said that I will write, I will write 0 and 1 to denote my quantum bit. So you see, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the physics or the qubit description and the maths because that's all the time we have. So this quantum bit, so physically, it's what we call a 2-dimensional quantum system. Mathematically, it's a 2-dimensional vector space, and I think I wrote that there, which means my 0 will be represented as a 2 cross 1 matrix, okay, with very simple entries because this is a specific element that I'm writing. So I have to specify what these elements are. So the entries will be 1 and 0, and 1 will be 0, 1. Okay? And now you realize that I can multiply these with numbers, add them, and I will get a different column vector like this, something which has entries alpha beta, for example. So I can go from these two elementary states of my qubit to a state like this. And here comes the first difference between the classical and the quantum bit. So long as my classical bit was just numbers, I just had it was a binary valued variable, just two values, 0, 1. But because my qubit is built out of quantum systems, and states of quantum systems are represented as vectors, so they are objects which have this kind of higher dimensionality, right? They are represented as arrays, they are not simple numbers. Then this allows me to access states like this. So I'm no longer restricted to just using 0 and 1, but I can prepare arbitrary superpositions of 0 and 1 and make all kinds of states like this. And all of these states are accessible to my qubit. Yeah.
You said you could multiply 0 and 1 in this case, right? The qubit 0 and qubit 1.
Multiply, I
Look
have
at
not
Z.
yet spoken about
You can't.
multiplication.
Okay.
You can, but so not yet. I have not yet told you how to multiply them. Okay. So, okay, good. So that brings me to the next thing that I have to talk about, the dot product, right? So I have drawn some analogies between this and this, right? I've told you how you can go from your three-dimensional real vector to a more abstract notion of vector. Told you how you can add them in some way. Okay, so now how do I add them? So let's do this math a little bit more, since I realize not everyone is used to the idea of matrices. So if I were to do this in the column vector notation, this will be what? Vx, Vy, Vz plus some Wx, Wy, Wz. Okay? So how will you add two matrices? Entry wise, right? So this is Vx plus Wx, Vy plus Wy, Vz plus Wz. So now you do this. So you do alpha 0 plus beta 1. What does this give me? So remember 0 and 1 are here. So so this is my 3D space and this is my qubit space. Okay? So this is alpha 1 0 plus beta 0 1. Remember, alpha and beta are numbers. So how do I multiply a number with a 2 cross 1 matrix? Entry wise again. So this, correct. So it's alpha plus 0, 0 plus beta. So that is me alpha beta, right? So this is how I will represent this kind of a superposition here. Now comes the next question. How do I multiply things? And how do I do this inner product or dot product? That's just a representation. It's like how I started writing in terms of rows instead of columns. I could have started with 0, 1. But once I start with either 1, 0 or 0, 1, the other logical bit is fixed. And I'll tell you why. Once we do the product, it will become clear why. Okay, so now I need this important idea of inner product or scalar product. Okay. Now what does an inner product do? It takes two vectors. It's an operation that takes two vectors and gives me a number, gives me a scalar. So now my question is, I have, let's say, this 3 cross 1 matrix. What can I multiply it with to get a number out? Do you understand my question? I need to multiply this with some object which will give me a number. Very good. So now comes, who asked me something about rho? Yeah. So we need to go from, so now all the elements of my vector space are like this, right? So where do I get this object from? You understand the question? My vectors are all, huh? Wonderful, excellent. So I need to do some operation called a transpose. Nice. Okay. So I have to do a transpose, and this notation where kets represent columns, when I do the transpose, I call this a bra vector. Okay? So this is a ket and this is a bra. And the reason you call this a bra is because you put them together like this. Yeah. Okay? And when I put them together like this, I get a number. I have taken the ket, which is a column. I have done the transpose. Is everyone familiar with the transpose? Maybe I'll just, yeah. Okay. So I do the transpose, I get a 1 cross 3. I get this. And then I put them together like this, means I do this matrix multiplication. And when I do that, I should get a 1 cross 1, which is a scalar or a number. Okay? So to realize this notion of an inner product on an arbitrary vector space, on a generalized idea of a vector space, I have to go to a different object. So there is, I mean, if I'm taking inner product of V with itself, I could take V with W or any other, whatever vector I'm taking the inner product with. So this bra vector, or what you get by doing the transpose, mathematically this is called a dual. Okay? So it's as if I have V, okay, which contains all these, so you know this notation, right? So it contains all these ket vectors. I will write down something called V dual. This contains all the things you get by doing a transpose. So this is called the dual to the vector space. And the way I make an inner product is by multiplying together elements of the original vector space and its dual, right? That's how in this case I get a 3D vector case. You actually did component wise. That's what you do. Right? You do u dot v, you multiply them component wise. You're doing exactly the same thing, except when you realize it in matrix language, you have to be a bit more formal about it. You have to understand that these objects belong to one, and then you have to do a certain operation to get an object like this. So let's do the dot product u dot v. In your normal real vector space, you know what this is. This is ux, vx. Oops, I'm sorry, my u and v look very alike. Right? So we'll realize the same thing now. So I'll take a ket u. Can I erase this part? Maybe I'll just work this out here. Yeah.
Why doesn't the dual vector belong to the original vector space?
Because I have defined it as a collection of kets. I've defined it, and my representation in my head, not my head, but the definition I have made for this is as column vectors. So this, you see, if I put the row vector here, it's not going to satisfy these properties. How do I sum a row vector and a column vector? Right? So if I have to make a vector space, they have to satisfy this structure. They have to have this structure. So I have to define a different space which is related to this, which is in every way similar to this, and that's why it's called a dual, because there's a one-to-one correspondence between these two sets. Okay? So good. So let me do this example here. So ket u is this. Ux, uy, uz. Ket v is this, vx, vy, vz. So now I can do this inner product as, so what did I do there? U dot v, right? So I have to do this. Okay, in this notation, this is what I have to do. And now remember that when I write this bracket here, the bra u is a transpose of the ket u. So this is going to look like the row ux, uy, uz. So when I take the transpose of a column vector, the object I get is called a row vector. Okay? So this is ux, uy, uz, and the dimensionality of this is 1 row, 3 columns. Then I have my vx, vy, vz, And then now you can do your standard matrix multiplication, right? How do you multiply this and this? You do this times this plus this times this, so you get back your inner product. Is that clear? Okay, good. So we've seen now the, yeah. Yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that. And in fact, I'm not going to restrict myself to real entries anymore. So I'm going to throw in the next thing here, which is complex numbers, okay? So let's do that next. So now, I didn't completely define the quantum qubit when I wrote this. I said two-dimensional vector space, but actually, it's a, they don't have color chalk here. Huh? Okay. So it's actually a two-dimensional complex linear vector space. So now I'm giving you the full gory definition. Huh? Sorry? Some kind of? Sorry, yeah.
Ma'am, so we can say it's some kind of Hegart's plane.
Some kind of? I didn't understand.
Hegart's plane.
What plane? Oh, okay. You mean an Argand plane?
Yes.
Okay. This is what you meant. Oh, you meant Descartes. Huh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's been ages since all right. Yes, so what do I mean by a complex linear vector space? I'll just come to that. See, this idea of a plane where you represent your complex number. So let me say now alpha. So now henceforth all the scalars that I write down are going to be complex numbers. Okay? Everybody here has been introduced to complex numbers. Yeah? So this is how I represent a complex number, and this is a plane where you represent your complex numbers as points on this plane, right? But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when I take the, so here you see the entries of these columns, they're all real numbers. Why? Because we were describing a real Euclidean 3D space, right? Nothing complex about it. So all entries are real. Things that I multiply with to scale the vector up or scale the vector down, the scalars, they are also real, right? But now when I have to describe complex systems, there comes an, quantum systems, there comes this notion of, so let me erase this, okay? So I'm really not talking about this plane. We'll see what I'm talking about, but so alpha is going to be complex number like this. So in quantum systems, you have to describe something called a phase, okay? And this degree of freedom called a phase is something which requires complex numbers to describe it. So complex numbers come naturally because of the physics of the system that we are describing, okay? And therefore, what happens is, remember I said you can make these superpositions like this of your qubit. This alpha and beta will now be complex numbers. They can be complex numbers. We are not restricted to the real entries like we were in the case of describing real 3D geometry, right? So now a complex number, so why phase? And why, what has that got to do with complex numbers? So you know that a complex number can also be written in another way. Can I write it like this? So this is what I will call, I will call this, you call it polar coordinate, whatever, I don't know your term. Amplitude is okay? And what is this called? Phase, exactly. Okay? This is why to describe complex systems, I'm sorry, I keep saying this, to describe quantum systems, you need to go into the field of complex numbers. The field of real numbers does not capture all the physics of quantum systems, right? So you will find your I, this is your square root of unity, naturally occurring when you start studying quantum mechanics, okay? So now this vector space, that's why it's complex, okay? That's why it's called a complex vector space, because so when I say that I can make these kind of superpositions, so remember that this had this representation, right? So now you see the entries of these column vectors can now be complex. Now how do I do the dot product? Okay, so now I have to refine my definition of inner product a little bit, okay? Rather, I have to define my definition of what I mean by the dual, okay? So the dual now is no longer just the transpose of the vector. So let me now write down a general vector. So suppose I want to take the inner product between u and v, okay? Now I'm going to call the entries of u as some u1, u2, because I want to move away from this xyz picture, okay? So I'm going to call the entries u1, u2, where u1 and u2 can both be, so this is the notation you use to define the field of complex numbers. So similarly, I will write v as some v1, v2, once again complex numbers. So now if I do the dual to get the bra vectors, so let me say I want to do this inner product uv, right? This is no longer just the transpose, but it is the transpose followed by a complex conjugate operation. You all know what a complex conjugate is? Okay, so if I have x plus iy, yeah, so maybe it's a different terminology that you use. I don't know what you call it, alpha star or alpha bar? But I'm going to use star. Sorry. So, okay. So alpha star is what you are used to calling as alpha bar, the complex conjugate. It means that I'm flipping the sign of this. Now when you translate this to this language, which is the amplitude and phase, what does conjugation do? Have you done this? What happens when instead of x plus iy I have x minus iy? What changes? The amplitude doesn't change, right? Because amplitude remains square root x squared plus y squared. So it's only the phase that changes. So now this has the same amplitude. So this is a kind of phase transformation, a phase flipping operation in some sense. So this complex conjugation is what you need to write down the dual vector. So now, so let me write this for me. So this is, I take the normal column vector, I do transpose and I do complex conjugation. So when I do transpose, the 2 cross 1 will become a 1 cross 2. So it becomes a 1 cross 2 with u1 star, u2 star, where star means this kind of conjugation, complex conjugation operation. So now the inner product will look like, so you multiply this with v1, v2. So you'll realize that it looks like u1 star v1 plus u2 star v2. So the inner product is no longer just ux, vx, uy, vy or u1, v1, u2, v2. It is with the complex conjugate. Yeah, sure. No, but please, yeah.
What is the physical motivation for doing this as a physics motivation, so to speak?
Why do we need the complex numbers?
Why do we need conjugate?
Conjugate. Actually, I was just coming to that. So in your standard 3D real vector space, you have a notion of length, right? What is the length of a vector v? How do you calculate it? Vy squared plus vz squared. Can you represent it as a dot product for me? How do I represent the length of a vector as a dot product? Very good. So it's just v dot v, right? I'm going to erase all of this stuff. I don't think I need this. Yeah, so the notion of length, we've not yet come to that, right? We saw dot product, scalar product, but actually that's what gives rise to the notion of length of a vector. Because formally the length of a vector is nothing but the dot product of the vector with itself. So if I say what is v, which I think this is how you call it, right? Without the arrow, or I don't know if you put this, yeah? Correct? You've seen this? Surely in physics you've done this because you're looking at speed and velocity and all that. Now, if I want to look at the length of a vector in this complex vector space, okay? So then I take this v. Now, because it's an abstract vector space, I'm going to put two lines to talk about the length. Formally, this will be called norm. Okay, this is the language you will encounter. So what we are doing is the basics of linear algebra, right? And in linear algebra language, this will be called a norm. Okay? The idea is the same. I have to do the dot product of v with itself. But now you realize that because the entries are complex, you see the length is a physical quantity, right? The length of a vector is a measurable physical quantity. And we would require it to be so even for these abstract vector spaces. We want the length to be a real number. Because at the end of the day, in a lab, what I measure is real numbers. I don't measure complex numbers. I can measure different real numbers which I can put together to make a complex number. Like if I have a wave, I can measure its phase. You've seen the phase in the context of waves, I presume. I can measure the phase. I can measure the amplitude. I put that together to get a complex number, but I can't directly measure something like alpha. Similarly, the length, I require it to be a real quantity. So because I want it to be a real quantity, so the analog of the dot product is this, no, the inner product. But therefore now when I define this dual or the bra, I can't make it just the transpose. I need to do the complex conjugation because only then will I get a real number out of it. Because now what is v? It's like this, v1, v2, right? Yeah? So in this notation, this is the amplitude, right? So this is just amplitude of v1 squared plus amplitude of v2 squared, right? Okay? So this is real. So this corresponds to some notion of length so this is the reason that we will have to do the complex conjugate when you do the dual, okay? Okay, so I think we've pretty much covered all the mathematical background that we need for this. So now you understand how to do the transpose, complex conjugate, so you know what superposition means from a mathematical perspective. So maybe we just take a 5-minute break and then we'll start, I'll give you some example of a real physical system where all of this gets applied, and then we'll hopefully see some ideas in quantum computing, okay? Yeah. I think I need to take a few minutes